not the best representative of Africa to be here, and but I thought it was worthwhile perhaps just mentioning some of the things that are happening in Africa, and particularly in South Africa. So one of the difficulties that we have as far as advancing these ideas in Africa is that at the moment they are very much unknown. And some of the people in this room attended the COP17, the 17th meeting of the Convention of the Parties on the Climate Change Convention, which happened in Durban. And I was approached before the COP17 because the difficulty was this big climate change event was happening in South Africa, and it wasn't really involving civil society in any way. And people knew that I'd been involved with the development of the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth at Cochabamba, and they said, can't we have an African one? So I said, well, I don't think that that's a very good idea, because the whole point of it is this is a universal declaration. One doesn't want to create competing versions at this stage. And they said, we need some kind of document to discuss with people to do with climate change. You know, can't you think of something? And they had decided that they were going to have a climate change train, which would start in Cape Town and travel around the country and end up in Durban. And on the way it would stop and discuss ideas for small communities. So at first I was a bit dubious about the idea, and then I gave it some more thought. And in the South African struggle, one of the most important documents was known as the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter was drafted in the 1950s by a grassroots campaign. And the beauty of the Freedom Charter is that in the 1950s, South Africa was deeply under apartheid, if I can put it that way. The state was extremely strong. The military and police were used brutally against the majority of the population, and it must have looked like this system could never change. And yet, people got together at grassroots level, and they dared to imagine a radically different future. They got together to create a dream of the society that they wanted to live in, and they wrote it down in the Freedom Charter, which is an aspirational document. It's a document which expresses their desires for the society, for a radically different society. So it has statements like the doors of learning and freedom shall be open. People shall have peace and security in their homes. This was an imaginative exercise under repressive conditions to imagine a different future. Now, with all the problems of the new South Africa, we pretty much live in the society described in that document. So that dream did, in fact, come about. And that's an extraordinarily powerful document. It was never a legally binding document, but if you went to any demonstration, protest, etc., through the 70s, 80s, 90s in South Africa, there would be people with placards quoting parts of the Freedom Charter. And the key for that document was legitimacy, because this was a document which reflected the voice of the people. It had come from through a grassroots democratic process that had a final convention in Kliptown, where they had finalized the documents. At that time, leaders like Mandela were banned, and they were stories that some of the leaders were in buildings far away with binoculars watching the process because they weren't allowed to proceedings, so they weren't allowed to participate. But it was the only document which reflected the voice of the people, and because of that, it had enormous legitimacy, and it also has influenced the shaping of the new South Africa, and it's still a document which is referred to from time to time. And I thought we're living in a similar circumstances, because the society that all of us are discussing here is radically different to the society that we live under now. It seems possibly improbable, as it must have seemed to those people in the 1950s. But the key thing is to start imagining it, to start conceiving of what it might be. And once you can conceive and believe, you can achieve it by organizing. So I took those two ideas and discussed with a group of people and decided to come up with a document which drew on the tradition of the Freedom Charter, which was familiar to people, so that people could connect it with their history of struggle. But at the same time took the ideas from the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth and tried to express them in terms of African philosophy. So in terms that were familiar to African people already, to embed it in indigenous thinking. And so it talks a lot about community, which is very powerful in Africa, and it uses African ways of thinking. And for any of you who are interested, I have a copy of the document and the commentary which explains the philosophy underlying it if you're interested. But it was essentially an attempt to take the Universal Declaration and make it specifically relevant to Africa while drawing on this history of struggle. The document was then taken around South Africa on the climate change train and was discussed with about 16 communities, and there was a very positive response. It was, from the outset, it was made very, very clear that this was not the document. This is a draft to start a discussion, because a draft prepared by one person or a group of people has no legitimacy. The power of any such document can only come through a process which creates a legitimacy by virtue of its involvement of many, many people in it, and the fact that it is shaped collectively. So there was a very positive response, and after the COP17, the 17 NGOs, community-based organizations who were responsible for the civil society aspects of the COP17 met to decide, ready to decide whether they were going to do any more work, and they decided to disband the grouping, but they wanted certain initiatives to proceed, and in particular this initiative. So they mandated a small steering group, of which I was one, to work out how to take forward this discussion, how to start a process similar to the one that resulted in the Freedom Charter. The difficulty that we faced was whichever organization we chose in the country to take this forward would alienate other people. Every organization had a certain constituency and was liked by some people and disliked by others. So after some discussion, we decided to start what we called the Earth Democracy Cooperative, and that all the organizations that were interested could be members of the cooperative. So in other words, nobody could own this, but everybody could be part of it. And the attempt is to avoid it being captured by any particular group. Now, unfortunately, it's still in the early stages. We prepared all the documentation, and we've had some trouble with getting it registered because it doesn't look like a normal agricultural cooperative. But nevertheless, there's been a lot of support from it, particularly some of the indigenous peoples groups are part of it. There's a wonderful organization, the Southern African Faith Communities Environmental Initiative. This is an organization that incorporates all the religions in South Africa, from pagans, traditional African religions, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Muslim, everybody. And they have taken this up. They're one of the participating groups, as well as many others and some local communities. So we've still got a long way to go, but part of the idea is to first imagine the healed state, if I can put it that, to imagine the world that we would want to live in, and then to start organizing around that. And the organization I anticipate will be very much at the community level, analogous to what the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund has done in America, but it will be different in different areas depending on the circumstances. At the same time, these ideas have been taken up by other organizations, so there were declarations coming out of Durban from municipalities. There have been faith leaders throughout, meetings of faith leaders throughout Africa who have all passed resolutions endorsing the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth and the agenda that came out of Cochabamba. So we are beginning to see the process of the emergence of a broad movement that would be potentially capable of driving this kind of change. But we've got a long way to go. There have been many other initiatives throughout Africa. There's a network, the African Biodiversity Network, that has been working with Earth jurisprudence ideas for many years. And they have had many initiatives in different countries, particularly focused around protecting sacred areas, sacred pools, sacred forests, etc., working with communities. So Africa still has quite a long way to go to catch up with many of the other countries, but I feel confident that it will happen, because as you heard with during the Indigenous discussion earlier, the essential concepts that we are talking about are deeply rooted in African culture as elsewhere in the world. And the important thing is to connect this movement with those ancient, deep understandings which are rooted in culture and are still very present in Africa. In most places they are within living memory, or people are still practicing them, so it's not too far away. I'm just going to quickly mention the Universal Declaration before we go to, I think, questions, if there's time for questions. This is an item which was on the agenda. I don't propose spending much time on it, but it's important to mention it. As Pablo will tell you in more detail if you ask him, at the time of the Cochabamba meeting, the idea was that we would prepare a draft Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, which could then be presented to the United Nations with the view that it would get negotiated and adopted by the United Nations, as it happened with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. However, we also were realistic, and we could see that this was not something that was going to happen anytime soon. So the declaration that was adopted at Cochabamba, if you read it, is not a draft document. It is a declaration of the people who met at that Congress. It also calls on the United Nations to adopt it, but it is a final document in itself, and it is a people's document, and it derives its legitimacy from the number of people that participated in producing it, which was an enormous number. In fact, including a large number of indigenous people. So it, like the Freedom Charter, derives its legitimacy from the process that produced it. And I think it's an extremely important document for that reason. Now, there was a sort of so-called inside process, or an inside strategy and an outside strategy, as with many of these things. And within the United Nations, that we have allies who have been driving some of these ideas under the heading of harmony with nature. And there's a website dealing with harmony with nature, living in harmony with nature, and there have been expert panels where people have been invited, including several of us here in this room, to address the General Assembly on these issues. But Pablo and Linda Sheehan can give you more information on that. However, I think that, as Pablo has outlined, the climate has changed since Cochabamba. The climate, particularly for us moving things strongly in the United Nations, with the strong leadership of Ecuador and Bolivia, is unlikely to happen in the near future. So I think that we can have some discussion about this, but I think that most of us feel that the significance of the Universal Declaration is likely to be more powerful outside of the United Nations. Not that we would abandon the idea, it would be very nice if the United Nations adopted it, but its real significance is as a document which can be referred to as a people's document, reflecting the views of a broad scale of people. And because it came out of that very important meeting in Cochabamba, it has a certain legitimacy with the social movements, which I think is very important.